Good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the weekly political agenda. Tonight, we will discuss the latest developments in Syria and the Kurds' intervention in the crisis. In Syria, the Free Syrian Army fighters seized the northern town of Khan al-Asal, one of the last towns of the western part of Aleppo province that was held by President Bashar al-Assad forces. Meanwhile, Democratic Union Party, a Syrian Kurdish group, has taken control of several parts of northern Syria since the uprising against the government of Bashar al-Assad began in March 2011. The recent fighting in Syria's northern border area, where the rule of Damascus government has long collapsed, prompted the Kurds to try to establish a governing council to administer Kurdish-held areas there. Turkey worries that the emergence of an autonomous Kurdish zone in northern Syria could stir up Turkey's Kurdish minority of 12 million people. Before we start discussing the idea, let's take a look at the latest development with Syria's opposition coalition said on Tuesday it still did not have enough sophisticated weapons to turn the tide against forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad and would try to convince Paris to provide more military help. On Wednesday, Syrian authorities are blocking access to the old city of Homs, where trapped civilians are in dire need of food and medical supplies. The Red Cross said on Wednesday, warning of possible tragic consequences. More details on the following report.
A strategic town close to the northern city of Aleppo has fallen to the Syrian rebels. Khan al-Asal was considered the last regime stronghold in the west of Aleppo province. In the same time, Bashar al-Assad's militias were cleaning towns and villages of their Sunni Muslims inhabitants across the Syrian province of Homs, including the 13th century mosque of Khalid ibn al-Walid, which was damaged by the Syrian government airstrikes and shelling.
Till the moment, there are no indications to solve the Syrian crisis. Even the talks regarding Geneva II is not clear, and there is not a deadline for the conference. Also, the American administration is hesitated to hold the conference. Besides that, this conference will be very important for all the sides, the rebels and for the regime as well. And I think no one is ready for sitting on the negotiations table.
On Monday, the European Union has declared the military wing of Hizbollah to be a terrorist organization in a major victory for British diplomacy, and William Hague considered in reaching this agreement, the EU has sent a clear message that it stands united against terrorism, concerns that isolating the Shia movement would fuel instability in Lebanon and across the region were rejected by Foreign Secretary William Hague.
But due to concerns over the role of Hizbollah, we've agreed to designate its military wing on the list of terrorist organizations. That does not prevent the continuation of dialogue with all political parties in Lebanon.
The United Kingdom welcomes this decision. This is something that we've asked for, that we've pressed other countries for, and that we proposed a couple of months ago. So I'm very pleased that that has been agreed, that the EU has shown strong unity on that. It shows that there are consequences for violent action on European soil, that European countries will stand together, will use the powers that are available to them. So I think it sends a very strong message about that.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is considering the use of military force in Syria. Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said he has provided President Barack Obama with options for military strikes in Syria, which the civil war has cost at least 93,000 lives.
It is. And I've given those views to the President. We've given him options. The members of this committee have been briefed on them in a classified setting. We've articulated the risk. The decision on whether to use force is the decision of our elected officials.
The situation in the Kurdish area in the north of Syria has attracted the interest on the regional and global scale, especially after the Syrian Kurds have made rapid advances in the north on Tuesday, expelling jihadists from a string of villages, and mistrust between Kurds and Arabs grows. The latest clashes come a week after fighters loyal to the Committees for the Protection of the Kurdish People expelled the jihadists Al-Nusra Front and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant from the strategic Kurdish town of Ras Al Ain.
نعتقد أن الأخوة الأكراد بفصائلهم السياسية.
I think the Kurds with their different political groups know well that there is no geographic, political or human possibility to establish a separate country for them in the north of Syria. Regarding our allies, they know this fact very well. Moreover, they just want an administration to organize their own local issues and to express their own identity and culture.
A very critical week passed in Syria without reaching any practical solution for the uprising crisis for more than 2 years, but the talks regarding Geneva II has come back without putting a deadline for holding the conference till the moment. For Political Agenda, this is Mona Farag.
Thank you, Muna, and allow me to introduce my panelists. From the studio, Dr. Abdelaziz Al-Awaisheg, Assistant Secretary General of the GCC for International Negotiations. From Washington, D.C., David Mack, former Vice President of the Middle East Institution, former U.S. Ambassador and former Deputy Assistant for the Middle East. Last but not the least, from London, Dr. Khalid Qamaruddin, the President of the Coalition for the Syrian Revolution. Welcome to the program, all of you, and allow me to start from London with Dr. Khalid Qamaruddin. Dr. Khalid, many things are still unclear. Relations between the Syrian Kurds and other opposition groups, the Free Syrian Army, are said to be tense. In some Syrian Kurdish towns, under the de facto control of the PYD, pro-Assad troops have remained in their barracks, raising questions about a deal of sorts between Damascus and the Kurds. How do you see the latest developments, and how do you see the movement, the latest movement of the Kurds towards a separation entity?
Good evening to you and to your distinguished guests in Washington and in the studio, and to your viewers.
Welcome, sir.
The situation with the Kurds in north of Syria is another card of the regime and security services. This is clear to all, and we know them. The Kurdish people in Syria, they are Syrian, and they are the same as all of us. They suffered a lot under the regime. And this political group, they represent them now, they call they represent them, truly they do not represent the Kurds. The YDBK, which is a branch of the PKK, they are a stool of the government, and they killed Kurdish people in Al-Amudiya just about a month ago. They killed 6 people there. We know them. They are united now with another group of a tribe of Muhammad al-Faris, which is another stool of the government security service. And that is clear to all of us, and we know it, and the Kurds know them. But this is not going to work. This is not going to work because the Syrian people, they knew what they want. I mean, there are another excuses from the international community and from everybody just coming and putting excuses in order not to help the Syrian people and to cover their failure, their miserable failure, especially the Security Council failure. They're supposed to keep peace and security, and they have failed miserably, and only they found now excuses to cover their mistakes. And that is true, and it is a fact. I would ask everybody who asks this question or whatever, where they were 2 years ago when the whole revolution was peaceful, why they did not come and help. What the Syrian people, they asked for democracy, which the United Nations is supposed to protect it, and America, who they keep, you know, who will listen to America anymore after the Syrian revolution? Who will listen to any of that rubbish which we heard from politicians? It just to come and put excuses is not acceptable. People are dying in Syria, and we ask the international community to come and help, or otherwise shut up.
Okay. Well, Dr. Abdelaziz, before I go to Ambassador David, the historic enemy of the PKK, which is Turkey, or they might intervene within Syria to protect their own borders. And Muhammad Gul, one of the strategic, said, but here the question is one thing, the biggest question of all, will Turkey carry out its threat to intervene militarily in northern Syria to prevent the creation of Kurdish entity? Because they've been fighting with the PKK, Öcalan, and we have seen many demonstrations nowadays in Turkey to free Öcalan. So Turkey is so afraid of establishing a whole state of the Kurdish people, be it part of it Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. How do you read it, sir?
Turkey has been opposed to establishing a state in northern Iraq. So of course they will be even more opposed to establishing an enclave, Kurdish enclave in northern Syria. And they have said so. They're not going to tolerate it.
Exactly.
As you probably know, and I sympathize with what Dr. Khalid said, that this really comes at the worst time possible, this raising the Kurdish autonomy prospects. It not only sidetracks the fight against the regime, it engages the rebels, the Free Syrian Army, and the others in side battles that only the regime could benefit from. And second, they upset the delicate negotiations between the Kurds and the Turkish government, which have reached a very delicate stage where people expect a resolution of this conflict. So this comes to upset also those negotiations. And the best that the Kurds could hope for in northern Syria is temporary self-rule. In the long term, they will have to negotiate the future of their community within a larger Syria with their fellow Syrians. So it's, from all angles, it's very suspicious to raise these to raise the prospect of self-rule at this point, unless there is probably some trying to cut a deal with the Syrian regime. The immediate trigger was trying to get the jihadists out of the region, which is, I think, is worthwhile goal, but to raise at the same time the notion that there might be a self-rule or autonomy in that area, I think it comes at the wrong time for the Kurds, for the Syrians as a whole, and for the for the Kurdish, Turkish negotiations that are taking place.
Ambassador David, first of all, sir, how do you read the latest developments within the Syrian conflicts? And also, let me ask you, now we've heard Ashton, the foreign secretary for the European Union, that she says Hizbollah military wing was designated as a terrorist group, and we know that now that Hizbollah is partner, or actually they're killing the Syrians along with the regime. We've heard Dr. Khalid Qamardeen was kind of upset a while ago that nobody is trusting the American politicians after the killing of all these people. And we've heard lately, like yesterday and the day before yesterday, the victims reached to 300 in one day, or 270 in one day. So it's escalating of number of victims, the interference of foreign forces such as Hezbollah, and designating Hezbollah as a terrorist group. What will this add to the whole conflict?
Well, first let me say that I agree almost completely with the comments by Dr. Abdelaziz El-Umaishi. That's very close to the American position, as I understand it. We very much would not support a Kurdish separatism or a Kurdish mini-state in northern Syria. The United States insists on having very close relationships and coordinating closely with both the Turkish government and the Syrian National Coalition. With regard to some of the remarks that were made by your guest in London, Dr. Khalid Qamardeen, while I don't agree with some of the specific things that he had to say about the international community, I do agree that it would be very unfortunate if people used this latest move by a Kurdish party that is trying to take control of some areas up there, and probably coordinating in some respects with the Syrian government. It would be most unfortunate if that were used as an excuse to delay further action. Now with regard to Hizbollah, the United States views the evolution of European Union policy as being very favorable. Hizbollah has long been considered a terrorist organization by the United States, but we are sympathetic with Europeans who want to continue to have a dialogue with some of the political leaders of Hizbollah, even though they have done, I believe, the right thing by declaring that the Hizbollah military wing is a terrorist group. We have made it very clear in public statements from the State Department and the White House that the intervention of Hizbollah in Syria's internal conflict is a very, very destabilizing development. I will have more to say about U.S. policy later, but I am very pleased to be here with your two distinguished panelists in London and in Riyadh.
And we are pleased to have with you. Dr. Khalid Qamaruddin, how do you read designating Hezbollah's military wing as a terrorist group, and what will this add to your fighting against the regime? Now Hezbollah is siding with the regime. The United States have always considered Hezbollah as a terrorist group, but recently Europeans have decided that the military wing of Hezbollah is a terrorist group. What will this add to your struggle?
Well, actually, just quick things, a word or two about the Kurdish problem. The Kurds, they are oppressed the same as the whole Syrian, and the regime now is shopping to find somebody to give them a self-rule, but the Kurdish people, they turn it down. What it is now in the north of Syria is a fight between two gangs. The Islamic party of what they call it, Iraq and Syria, and another gang, a gang of Salih al-Muslim, just whoever control the oil in that region, that's all. But otherwise the people on the ground, they are with the revolution and they will not accept anything else. Even the regime, they offer them citizenship. How many of them they took it? Very, very little. And people, they don't listen to the regime, they are Syrian and they will stay Syrian. On the point of Hezbollah, that is very long overdue. Everybody knows what Hezbollah is up to. It is a terrorist organization. They use their fight with Israel, and then they had the agreement, they close the border, and they are another regime, the same as the Syrian regime. From 2006, 2007, nothing happened with Israel. And they are terrorist group. They invaded now another country, which is against international law, and they say political wing of Hezbollah. Well, Hezbollah, all of it is political ring. Even their leader, he talks like a military leader. That is well known. Okay, now we need action. What they're going to do? Let's talk about facts. There is a party, a military militia organization across an international border. Again and again, I ask the same question. What is the role of the United Nations and the Security Council, especially the Security Council, is to keep peace and security. They haven't done so. So what's the point of keeping the monster organization, which is costing a lot of money, and just why they don't say it clearly, look, forget about international law, do whatever you want, get your country liberated. And I would like to hear that answer from Mr. Mack, because he's a diplomat, and we need an answer, not a diplomatic answer, a fact, and we need a fact answer.
He's off post now. The viewers, a short pause, and we'll continue discussing now with my colleagues and my panelists, Abdelaziz Al-Awisheg, David Mack, and Khalid Qamaruddin, all in Political Agenda after this short pause. Welcome back. We're still discussing the latest updates and developments in Syria and the self-rule of the Kurds and also the intervention of Hizbollah. Dr. Abdelaziz, you want to add something about Hizbollah, but also, sir, the President Bashar al-Assad is now intending to kind of give parts of Syria, like Kurds and Alawis, so at least he can gain at least a small country or a small portion of Syria, or divide Syria into like entities, in different entities, Kurds, Sunnis, Alawis, name it. So after you add what you want to say about the Hezbollah's intervention, I would like you to go into
on Hezbollah first. The GCC at the beginning of June announced that it was going to take action against
you're right,
the interests of Hezbollah in the GCC, especially financial and business interests.
Yes,
it also at the same time condemned its intervention on the side of the Syrian government.
Yes.
There is no question that Hezbollah fighters have committed atrocities in overtaking Al-Qusayr, Tel Kalakh, and the areas around Homs. And as we speak now, they're surrounding Homs, committing all sorts of violations of human rights. And as you know now, once Hezbollah has crossed the Lebanese-Syrian border, is fighting in a foreign territory, so anything it does there could amount to war crimes that I think should trigger international action to prosecute not just its military wing, but also its leaders who are giving the orders to commit those atrocities. And since then, since the beginning of June, and that announcement that was made by the GCC Ministerial Council in Jeddah, there have been several meetings of security people, central bankers, and others in the GCC to first identify all the business and commercial interests and the individuals that are working on behalf of Hezbollah or entities, and then to work to disrupt them. A lot of work has been done since then, and more is going to happen in the future. I think Hezbollah has gone beyond, unfortunately, beyond just being a terrorist group or a militia within Lebanon known for its extreme violence to a bunch of war criminals fighting in foreign territory in Syria to create a sectarian enclave on the west side of Syria. And that then I will come to this. The second part, it seems the Syrian government is working on two plans. One is declared plan to crush the opposition throughout Syria. But I think its plan B is to try to create enclaves on the western part, on the coast. They're trying to drive away non-Alawites, non-Shiite, and to bring more Shiite in the area to create a more homogeneous Shia-dominated region in the west. And I think although there is no solid evidence they're doing this with the Kurds, but I think it stands to reason. I think it's very logical, very likely that they're doing that also with the Kurds. They have, in the beginning of the conflict, as you may remember, they create fears about the treatment of minorities. None of it has happened so far, but yet I think that their plan is to isolate the majority Sunnis and create these enclaves of Shia, Kurds, and other minorities.
Professor Ambassador Max, sir, Russia and Iran have always asked the foreign countries not to interfere within the Syrian conflict. But now, as Dr. Abdelaziz Al-Awisheg said, that Hezbollah have crossed the borders and reached to fight along with the regime that is not his country, and he's siding to a group against a group. In your point of view, you've always, even in last episodes, you have commented that against Obama's, the American president, against the red lines. Do you think now we have reached what the diplomats of the world are calling red lines by the interference of a terrorist group in another country against its people?
Well, it's pretty clear from the discussions that went on this past week in the Congress of the United States, in the two intelligence communities, or two intelligence committees, and finally the letter that General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, sent to the Senate Armed Services Committee, it's clear that the Obama administration, both military and the president himself, are reluctant to get heavily involved in Syria in a virtual state of war that would pit the United States not only against the Syrian regime, but at this point against Russia as well. It is still our long-term goal to see some kind of negotiated solution between the regime in Damascus, which may or may not include Bashar al-Assad at that point, but a negotiation between Damascus and between the Syrian National Coalition. We will, since we cannot get effective United Nations action because of the Russian opposition at this point, we are going to continue to work very closely with the government of Turkey, the government of Jordan, the government of Saudi Arabia, and other governments of the Gulf Cooperation Council in order to provide support to carefully selected units of the Syrian rebels. We have finally gotten the agreement of Congress, very reluctantly, to go along with this. But I have to tell Dr. Khalid Kamaluddin that there is very little support in the Congress of the United States or in the American public for going any further at this point. But we will be stepping up the flow of arms and the coordination of training to the Syrian rebels. We are very pleased by the position that has been taken by the Arab Gulf Cooperation Council. They have been very effective. They have been very forceful. We see that some of the divisions that had existed earlier between Qatar and Saudi Arabia seem to have disappeared. We view that as very positive. We continue to want to see a coordinated assistance to the Syrian rebels on the ground. We do want to cooperate with General Salim Idris and the Free Syrian Army, and on a political level with the Syrian National Coalition. It is understandable that there is a lot of frustration felt by our Syrian friends, but the plain fact is that more direct U.S. military involvement at this point would be, in the view of our own Pentagon, an act of war. It would involve huge losses, huge risks, and great suffering to the Syrian people, with a very outcome that is very hard to see. It took George W. Bush some 5 years in Iraq, and we don't find that outcome to be very positive either.
Yes, you're right. Okay, Dr. Khalid Kamaluddin, now, sir, when Ahmad Al-Jarba was elected as the president of the alliance, of the Syrian National Alliance, he promised of sophisticated weapons to reach